Right. A warm welcome, everyone, on behalf of the Southeast Europe Association to today's online discussion on Bulgaria's new government, Pact with the Devil or Way Out of the Impasse. We're very sorry for this short delay, but now we can start our discussion. And we would like to discuss the current situation in Bulgaria and what the new cabinet with the two prime ministers taking turns could mean for Bulgaria's domestic, but also for its foreign policy. We would like to thank our distinguished speakers here for accepting the invitation and for sharing their insights and their thoughts on the situation. And I would also like to thank our moderator, Kahlweit, for being here today, and she is the correspondent for Central and Eastern Europe at Süddeutsche Zeitung and very knowledgeable about Bulgaria. Thank you for being here with us. And last but certainly not least, I would like to thank our board member, Johanna Daimel, who is not here in the panel right now, but she was the one who conceptualized the whole event. I hope we will gain a lot of interesting insights, and actually without further ado, I will hand off to Ms. Kahlweit to introduce our not yet complete panel, but hopefully soon to be panel.
Exactly. Hello, everybody. I'm happy that you're listening to us. I hope we will have a great talk. Unfortunately, we're missing one person who is going to join us very quickly. So I'm going to start introducing the rest. And I'm going to say thank you for the great title, because the Pact with the Devil, a Way Out of the Impasse, is actually very helpful, because that will help us jumping right into the discussion. But first of all, I want to introduce Mina, who is joining us today. She's a journalist and storyteller, works for Deutsche Welle. So I'm listening to her once in a while and or reading at least about her. And she's a specialist on disinformation and investigation and all kinds of media and journalistic topics. Thank you for joining us.
Hi, thank you.
Hello. And we're having with us Dimitar, who is in Oxford at the moment, actually, as a lecturer at the School of Global and Area. Now I didn't finish writing it down. I'm sorry. I was confused because we were talking. Can you please repeat the name of the school? I'm embarrassed. I'm starting off badly.
Global and Area Studies.
Studies, that's the part. I was already talking when I was writing it down. You used to be at the European Council on Foreign Relations. That's how we met. And you are affiliated as well with St. Anthony's College. And the last things I read from you were about Turkey and Greece, actually. So you've kind of like very much widened your focus. But today you're going to talk with us about Bulgaria. And there's Daniel Smilov. Hello, hello. Who's a second late. Hello, thank you for joining us. He's working at the Center for Liberal Studies, director of the Rule of Law program, and lecturer at the CEU. You still are you? Are you still lecturing? Yes.
No, I'm actually associate professor at the University of Sofia. I teach political science.
So that was not. So I'm bad at introducing, but anyways. Thanks for being here, thanks for taking the time. We will talk about an hour about various topics. We're going to start with interior politics, move to the exteriors, to the foreign politics. Of course, have to talk about Ukraine, about Northern Macedonia. Okay, and we're obviously gonna start with the new government. And the question that I was asking myself, the new government might not last very long. The question is, how long will it last? How long will the new prosecutor general last in his office? How long will the Ukraine war last, and what implications does it have on Bulgaria? So we have lots of questions which are connected with time and political pressure. So I wanted to ask Daniel Smilov first, a very basic question. Were you surprised that this government in the end did work out and decided to work together? Because for a long time it didn't look like
it. Yeah, actually, there is a very high degree of uncertainty in Bulgarian politics right now. And I wouldn't say that whatever happens is something that I have anticipated and believed that it was going to happen exactly in this way. So the element of surprise is there. But generally, it was clear after the results were out that the only possible, maybe viable option is a coalition between the first two parties, or some sort of arrangement between them. It was unclear whether they're going to settle, whether they're going to find sufficient ground for compromise and for common solutions, but ultimately they were successful, in part because other players pushed them to do so. For instance, the president, President Radev, he had a very aggressive stance against, in fact, both two main parties. And this motivated them to form a government and to put an end to the interim governments headed or in fact composed and under the supervision of the president. So this was one fact. The other thing is there was the scandals in the judiciary that happened. These scandals damaged quite a lot. Of course, GERB and DPS. It was quite clear that GERB in its present form cannot be fully involved in the executive power, because there are quite a lot of scandals pertaining mainly to Borisov, but not only, within the party. So this made possible the rotation formula under which, at least during the first 9 months, GERB are not going to have big presence in the executive branch, in the government mostly. And the third issue was a kind of scandal within continuing change. Basically, there was a leak of their internal discussion, which was seen by many as damaging to their reputation. So they were also not in a very good bargaining position. And that's why they settled for a formula that previously they somehow didn't want to accept.
Daniel, I would like to pick up a lot of things that you said and get deeper into that. Mina, yeah, Daniel said there were the Borisov was, was having problems or was not acceptable. That has been true for a long time as part of the government, and so GERB joined in with PP, but without Borisov. But he's playing a massive role in the back, and he's probably still pulling strings. So, is it GERB without Borisov?
I wouldn't say that we can tell for now whether it is or it isn't. I mean, it's been quite not a long time for us to make a specific call whether it's GERB with him or without him. Of course, that's the fact that they decided, decided to work with GERB, and even with Borisov as a member of parliament right now has made some people angry or even disappointed that has happened. But it was, I think, the only viable solution to a very long political crisis and a string of governments that were put on by the president, which caused a lot of problems. And I think that what's happened now, it's too soon to tell what Borisov's role will be in the current government, and also because in the rotation scheme and principle that they adopted, we continue the change mandate as first, and that's the first party that's going to get into the 9 months of ruling the country in a way. So I don't think that it's enough time has passed for us to be able to definitively say whether his influence will be as big as we might expect it to be.
Okay, Dimitar, is this the best of all, or the best of all bad options that has formed now? And what do you think Borisov's role is in the background? Or is he actually in the foreground, just not as noisy as usual?
Well, he is very much so. He cannot be part of his government, but his government is essential for his political survival. Because otherwise, if he was in opposition, in real opposition, he'll have problems with the law. There is a pending investigation around him for money laundering. And also his power partnership with other stakeholders is under strain. The falling out with Bechev was symptomatic, the prosecutor general. And there was a bit of a situation of mutually assured destruction, where Borisov showed his capacity to get rid of Bechev, but equally the prosecutors, who for a long time have been a stakeholder in this power cartel, have files on Borisov. It goes both ways. We have to understand that GERB has two different partnerships. One is the government. It's a former coalition, although it's not based on a coalition agreement. It's based on a quote-unquote gentleman's agreement. There is no list of I mean, there's some priorities to do with the European Union, which I think eventually we'll end up discussing, but no formal document. But apart from that, there's an association with the Movement for Rights and Freedoms that's alive and kicking, and it's a long-standing link, except that it couldn't be brought into the spotlight for reasons people might be aware of. There are a lot of skeletons in the closet there. The vote at the Supreme Judicial Council, where the new caretaker prosecutor general brought it into the open, but not only in the previous parliament, MRF and GERB together with the socialists managed to orchestrate the change of electoral rules, electoral law, and this will continue going forward. So Borisov is trying to have a cake and eat it, be with the nice guys in government and get all the credit, but at the same time continue business as usual. And back to your question, whether this will succeed or not, I think we have to revisit the question after the local elections, because this is the real test case. Now, a lot of people have concluded Bulgaria is done with elections for the time being, but that's right, but also it's wrong, because the most important contest is still in the future. It has to do with big cities where a lot of power is rooted and lots of resources have been redistributed, where actually GERB and the reformist coalition are rivals, and where in Sofia at least, and maybe other places, if they play their cards right, guys have a chance to make a breakthrough. Because even last time in 2019, GERB won Sofia by a whisker, and now it's not very clear that they'll succeed to retain.
We'll get to the local elections a bit later again, but and I know that we cannot discuss this whole story without Bechev and the falling out, as you say, because everything is mixed and intertwined. But I would like to leave him out for just a second, having said that, and want to know from Daniel the reactions to this new government, this rotation principle, and those two improbable partners was extremely negative from the opposition. You could say, oh, obviously this was to be expected, but Ivanov said it's an interim government, nothing more. Radev said the leaders of those political parties betrayed the voters. Cornelia Ninova said it's Frankenstein. Vazrazhdane, okay, what do you expect? Said it's a velvet coup d'etat. So is there anybody who likes it?
Yeah, it's difficult to say. Even the supporters of GERB and continuing change, some of them, they have doubts. The situation is that, in fact, all the options are not very appealing that exist. And maybe this one is the only one that is at least possible, and also it will give a certain limited opportunity for Bulgaria to pass necessary legislation. So that's the best reading of the situation. Otherwise, really nobody is quite excited about this coalition or arrangement or whatever it is. But There are also actually factors that point out that maybe the whole arrangement is going to be stable until, as Dimitar Bechev said, until at least the local elections. Because these attacks from outside, they to a degree consolidate this unlikely coalition that has formed. The fact that there are strong attacks from the presidency and other political opposition parties, well, in a way, partly at least consolidate the government. The other factor is that summer is coming. August is generally a month which is not very active in Bulgaria. So if this government manages to survive until the 15th of July, let's say, it will probably last until the autumn. But there are,
which is really very impressive as a time frame, right? I mean, not being able to do anything in the summer when no bureaucracy works, and Brussels is on vacation and then coming back for the fall.
Yeah, my concern is that we actually haven't seen how this coalition is working. There are difficult issues to be resolved. The first one maybe is going to be the budget. But also there are appointments that need to be made in the judiciary, in independent regulators, and so on. And these tests, in fact, they're going to show whether this coalition is going to work or not. Up to now, they have been cruising basically without major challenges. The ousting of Bechev was probably the biggest one, but it was mostly due to, I think, the influence of GERB and DPS, the Movement of Rights and Freedoms, in the Supreme Judicial Council. So again, it was not a joint effort of all parties supporting this government. Yeah, we really need to see how this works in practice, because there is one possibility that GERB and DPS use this government as a front, and they try to make arrangements behind the scene to form different types of majorities in parliament. And this is quite possible because in fact they do have alternative majority in this parliament. So they could resort to votes of Slavi Trifonov's party. There is such people, but also Vazrazhdane have voted with them on specific issues. So there are all these alternative majorities in parliament. And the danger is that power is exercised by those alternative majorities, and the government is just an empty shell, is a puppet to this type of alternative majorities. We'll see. We'll see. This needs to be tested, but it is a possibility.
When you don't live in Bulgaria, or maybe even more when you live in Bulgaria, you learn to understand that politics is never taken as face value. I learned that as a correspondent, but there's always talk of conspiracies and trade-offs. So when you say nobody's really happy with that, and maybe there's, things in the background being worked at, Mina, I keep reading that society, at least society, whatever that is, people are happy that they have a real government, which has not been like implanted into Bulgaria by Radev. Are there any polls? Is there any, do you have any impressions, in your work of people saying, oh, finally, at least we have a government? I mean,
Yeah, I think there are some people, and not too small part of the population that feels this way. And there are a lot of problems and potential problems, like everyone said already. But I think there are people that are happy that the country is not led by an impasse government by the presidency anymore, because it was almost a year that went by like that. And that's a long time, especially when we keep in mind that foreign policy at the moment is also very important, considering the war that's happening in Europe and everything. And the president's position has been not as clear as it should be, in my opinion, and in many other people's opinion, on the topic of the Russia and Ukraine war, and the way that Bulgaria has been positioned in the European family, and when it comes to discussing what's happening in Europe and the role of Russia in it, so that the governments that have been put in charge by the president have had problems with that, and he himself has had problems with that. And that's why I think many people were happy to hear that whatever, I mean, it's not whatever government that we wanted to see, but the government that is now in place has made some people happy, because in many people's opinion, it is actually better than what was going on for the past a little less than a year.
Dimitar, Daniel, in his introductory statement, mentioned the wiretap affair. In those talks, embassies were mentioned, you know, like acknowledging who could be in what position, and how the government should position itself. Is that a real scandal, or was it made a scandal?
I think it was made a scandal. It was not a big secret that you have Bulgaria's allies and partners wishing to have a pro-Western government. And I think they, from day one, believed that the Grand Coalition was the way forward, because GERB in November, let's remind people, voted in parliament to provide military assistance to Ukraine. Same with MRF, by the way. So at least on these priority issues, GERB has taken a very clear position, which was not the case in previous years, but it's a separate conversation. So the West was highly supportive of this pairing. Problems were to do with distrust between the partners. Clearly, continuing the change, don't trust GERB, and I don't think GERB has any trust the other way around. The danger, though, going back to this discussion we had about the real power and the facade power of the coalition government, is whether Western support based on foreign policy is a substitute for substantial reform in Bulgaria. In other words, we end up with a cabinet which does what, by the way, people have done for a long time, since Petkov was in power, providing military assistance. And that also the caretaker government, without recognizing it, they also continued the deliveries to Ukraine. With the blessing of the president, I'm sure, despite what he says in public. So if that's the price to pay for a lack of reform, or some cosmetic reforms, like getting rid of Bechev without substantive institutional rearrangement, that's my fear longer term. And then also you have to acknowledge that the pressure from the outside does the job occasionally. The fact that you have people blacklisted under the Magnitsky Act, it's not that it has shamed people now. Delampevsky, the infamous oligarch, is part of the Constitutional Change Commission. And there's some limits to how much you can decide beyond Sofia. But it tips the balance. So credit to the US government and to the UK for doing it, for calling a spade a spade. And by the way, this is not a story that starts yesterday. I remember very vividly, at the risk of boring people here, but around 2004, a long time ago, when the EU Commission, in the context of the negotiations with Bulgaria, was very diplomatic on many of those rule of law issues. You had the ambassador, US ambassador, the late James Pardew, who was very outspoken. He didn't shrink from picking a fight with the then Prosecutor General Filchev. But again, I think the main issue is that whatever power or influence those big states outside Bulgaria wield, the experience in Bulgaria shows that unless there is pressure from within, from citizens, from political parties, other players, nothing will change. Because at the end of the day, you have skin in the game as Bulgarian citizens to change the way the country is governed. It cannot be resolved in Brussels or Washington or wherever else.
There were a lot of like things in what you said now that sound like the real power is not in Sofia, the real power is elsewhere, which is obviously something that is.
I believe the opposite. The real power is in Sofia, and it's in the local. It's in places like Burgas, in Plovdiv, and where money is distributed. It's just the opposite.
But you just said that you're grateful. People should be grateful to the UK and to the American.
No, I believe they nudged. No, let's be clear. I think they nudged. They have influence, but they cannot decide how we vote. They cannot decide elections. They cannot decide who is the prosecutor general. Bulgaria has resilience, and a political elite knows how to play the game. We've been in this for 30 years. And it's an illusion that Bulgaria can be reformed or influenced from the outside unless there is push from the inside. So real power is actually, it's in Bulgaria, the real power. That's my conclusion.
But isn't that, I mean, that you could be depressing as a fact when you say, the real power is in Bulgaria, but for a long time, nothing has ever changed to the good. Mentioning Pievsky sitting in the relevant committees, reforms being made almost impossible. So, what has to happen for reforms to be possible, to implement? What would have to change? I mean, Bechev being driven out is obviously not enough.
Well, yeah, I wouldn't say that what has happened in the judiciary in the past few weeks is in any way enough for crucial actual reform to happen. But as was said earlier, what needs to happen now is that we need to see how these two parties that distrust each other and have shown that multiple times before in previous political campaigns and even before they form that government. We need to see how they work together and who's going to take the lead, because I think that there is going to be someone who takes the lead. And the fact that somebody like Telampevsky is now part of a very relevant commission in parliament that is supposed to take crucial part in the judiciary reform that everyone's been waiting for and talking about and striving for is probably going to be a problem, but we need to see them actually work at it, and we've only seen like mostly talking about it up until now. And I'm not sure what needs to change in order to actual reform for actual reform to happen, but if happen, there's two things that could happen. Either they actually work together, and in the best case scenario, what our fears are about that everything will stay as it was in the previous years and nothing will actually change because GERB and DPS will continue doing what they're doing, just with an alternative majority in parliament. If that doesn't happen, then maybe there will be a way for actual reform to happen. But I think it takes a lot of actual working together that we haven't seen yet.
Okay. Daniel, what impression do you have of Denkov and Mariya Gabriel? Are they relevant for the political game, or have they been installed because you can walk around them?
Well, actually, both of them are very professional. I think they were right choices for this position. So the idea is that you have a government which is partly political, but also it has a technocratic image. And I think that from this perspective, they were well chosen, and they have the potential to pull it through. One thing that I wanted to say was on the previous question how we assess what is happening in Bulgaria. And in fact, of course, you might look it from the negative side, that it's a case of incomplete reforms, not sufficient political power to push through necessary reforms. On the other hand, during the last 2 years, we have this opening, actually. The situation creates new possibilities, and this shouldn't be underestimated. We had a political party of a liberal nature which emerged, a coalition which has almost a fourth of the electorate which has emerged. So all these are possibilities for positive solutions. The question is whether these actors could be strong enough, in fact, to pull through the reforms.
Mm-hmm. Okay, that makes sense. I didn't want to talk badly or give the impression that I'm being depressed, but when you sit in Germany or in Austria, you get a different impression by reading, obviously, about the scandals, which brings us exactly to Mr. Bechev. So Dimitar, what actually brought this? What brought it about that in the end he was made to leave? I mean, nobody expected that. 2 weeks ago, I read it's impossible.
Well, it was his own personality. Of course, there's an institutional problem with the prosecutor general, which has reappeared time and again over the years. But even by the standards of this institution, which is always ridden with scandals, he went a step too far in trying to be a politician and to play the populist. And he made many enemies in the process, to the extent that now Borisov and the Movement for Rights and Freedoms decided to scapegoat him, to wash their hands, if you will, as a substitute to judicial reform. But I want to also go back to something Daniel said about the glimmer of hope. Very often, the external portrayal of Bulgaria is something along the lines, until 2020, there was stability and it was all fine because the country was stable. And then all of a sudden, things went down the drain because we have so many elections, so many unstable administrations, X, Y, and Z. Well, from my perspective as a citizen of Bulgaria, having a stable quote-unquote government between 2017 and 2020 involving clientelist party and the far right, with a prime minister who never bothers to go to parliament for parliamentary control and speaks demeaningly about the head of the parliament, it was the worst. And then you have, of course, the cartel operating perfectly, with Bechev being very well incorporated. And if we had this discussion 5 years ago, it would have been much gloomier, I think.
Mm-hmm.
2020 did change things, and I think it's important to convey this message. There's a price to pay. There's the price to pay with instability, with those short-lived governments, with the presidential overreach. But I think there's a word to be said about what was the situation beforehand, where we had this equilibrium, negative equilibrium of state capture funded by basically German taxpayers and the rest of Western European the taxpayers, and we have a pro forma stability, economic growth, what have you, but you didn't have any vision for how to move forward. But I also agree with Daniel that there is no critical mass for change. There is no critical mass on the other side as well. They basically cancel one another, and therefore we have this coalition.
Well, maybe the critical mass is the people who are on the streets and who used to be on the streets for the last years. I mean, I would just remember the mass demonstrations 3 years ago. As you said, the positive outcome is that there was a new party, actually, which is in power now, has been in power twice, actually. And there is maybe the protesters are like the corrective. But let me go back to Bechev once, because you said he was, became a burden for GERB and Borisov. You put it in a different way, but I always had the impression that he was the perfect helping hand for Borisov and Bechev and all those guys, never really touching any corruption cases. So Mina, is the driving out of Bechev another good sign? And does it make you optimistic?
I wouldn't say that this specifically makes me optimistic, because as was mentioned previously, it could be taken as sign of them just trying to get rid of him because they had to make some sort of compromise to seem like they had the will to move forward, and with the judicial reform and everything. I wouldn't say that what has happened with Bechev has made me particularly optimistic.
It's another trade-off again, a deal in the background?
I think it might be, yeah. I don't know yet, obviously, but it feels that way. And I wouldn't say that what happened there specifically made me optimistic about the future reform plans and everything. Also, the fact that his deputy is now taken the place of chief prosecutor, which he's been basically with the same reputation as Bechev has, and what has changed then if he's going to do the job for Bechev that has been put away. And what we saw in the last few weeks was him trying to fight back and getting prosecutions that were put to rest for whatever reasons out in the open, and pretending to do the work like as if it just only happened yesterday, when all of us know that it happened a long time ago, and it's been negated for the past few years, or how so. So I don't think that making him personally go away is a sign that something in the judiciary is about to change. There needs to, more things need to happen, and what's happened up until now, that fight between them has been, for me, it's been more of a bad influence than a good one. It's made me less optimistic, if any.
Okay. Mm-hmm. So, Dimitar, do you agree? And do you think that Borisov Sarafov, I hope I'm saying that right, is gonna stay?
Well, I think that's the game plan. That's why he turned against Bechev unexpectedly at some point. Mm-hmm. But let's underscore that the problem is institutional. You have a very powerful figure in Bulgaria who is there for 7 years with precious little accountability and lots of opportunities to exert political pressure, twist arms, start prosecution investigations, or indeed to kill possible investigations against high-profile figures in business and government. So the challenge is how to make prosecution accountable and implement the systems of checks and balances. And that's the spirit of this new legislative change that has been on the table, to establish a mechanism to investigate Prosecutor General. But it's only the first step, because in an ideal world, and I think that's what many people in Continuing the Change Democratic Bulgaria believe, you probably want to get rid of this figure, but it's very difficult to achieve because it will require a constitutional change. And then it seems to me that vested interests have calculated, and we very much see it now with this committee in Parliament, that rather than fight back changes, they want to be on board in order to steer them in the right direction and to undermine them from within, as it were. So it's a very devious game, as it were.
Actually, I wanted to ask Daniel about the rule of law question, but since he vanished, I'm going to ask the two of you. Looking at Hungary and the rule of law process, and Poland, I'm not quite sure where that is going to lead, whether it's going to be successful. But taking in consideration what you just said, a reform process which is being played with, and directed and redirected by interested groups, and in a so-called captured state, as we always hear, should there be more pressure? Should there be a rule of law process implemented on Bulgaria, just like on other actually Eastern European countries? Who wants to take the Yeah, what do you think?
Well, I have an opinion on this one, but I want to be speaking only. First of all, Bulgaria is different from Hungary, which is the typical case. In Hungary, you have Orban as the pinnacle of power. The problem in Bulgaria, Borisov was not the supreme leader. He was at best the chairman of a board of governors. So there are many stakeholders in Bulgaria. State capture is a collective enterprise. So
who would you direct the pressure at? Yes.
You remove Borisov, you remove Bechev, there'll be new people. You have to fight against the culture, the informal ways of doing things in Bulgaria and the norms around it. And it's very difficult. Personal changes are easy and substantive change is really difficult when you're talking about institutions. And that's number one. Secondly, the European Union for some time has been very heavy-handed on Bulgaria. In 2009 and then in 2014, it cuts EU funds. So the short-term effect is always dramatic. There are changes, but then longer term, everything goes back to business as usual, unfortunately. So the right approach in Bulgaria is to have pressure. And by the way, right now, this change with the law and the draft bill that Minister Zarkov put forward, it would have been possible if it wasn't for the EU saying that the second tranche under the what's the name? Resilience package, the COVID fund.
It's a COVID package, COVID help fund.
Recovery and resilience. That's what I want to say. The second package has to be linked to reform. So the EU has recovered some of its conditionality power. And I think it's a good thing. It's good that the Netherlands and the Austrians back in 2020, when the negotiation was going on in Brussels, actually called for stricter conditions. But I think again, this is a sufficient, but not this is a necessary, but not a sufficient condition. To have profound change, you have to also have domestic actors driving forward changes. It cannot be done from Brussels. And I think it's the same in Poland. I mean, in Poland, the system is resilient, but because we have this party which is still very popular. But Poland is a 50-50 country. That's different from Hungary. There is a real prospect that the opposition will be back. And also, the government needs to have a coalition with even more radical groups. So it's not as desperate to me than what you see in Hungary after as many elections.
Yeah, that's true too. Mina, do you agree? You're nodding.
Yes, I do. I was thinking about the European mechanism that we were talking, Dimitar was talking about, and how conditions were imposed. And I think that in the past few months and years, that has proven to be effective in driving some sort of change. But I do agree that it's not sufficient to instill actual change because if the changes that are required by the European Union are not done in actuality with the people actually standing behind them, but are only done because they need to be done. That's a step, but it's not a step all the way where.
Well, but you always have to deal with that. I mean, that's always going to be the question. Do you do something because you're convinced, or do you do because the pressure is too high? I'm afraid sometimes you don't have a choice. But I want to get back to something that you said, Dimitar. The EU was very heavy-handed on Bulgaria, is what you said 2 minutes ago. I had the impression that changed lately, because the EU is very much grateful. Which is not a contradiction to what you said, because you were talking about 14 and 19. But I'm talking about now. The EU is very grateful because Bulgaria is taken a very constructive position when it comes to the anti-Russian, pro-Ukrainian war coalition. Would you say that?
Yeah, I mean, Ukraine has given many of those governments, not just in Bulgaria, some more room for maneuver. Bulgaria has a mixed reputation, because if you talk to the general political observer, it's usually clustered in the pro-Russian bracket, and for a good reason. If you look at sociological surveys, you have at least 30% in the country who take a view which is directly in line with what Kremlin is saying about the war and about the world in general. So there's this hardcore minority of Putin lovers in Bulgaria. But if you look at actual policy,
that's what I mean, yeah.
But Bulgaria has been consistently supportive. And I mean, Petkov went on the record last December where he broke the story about the diesel and about the ammunition sent to Ukraine. But frankly, it was a public secret because everyone could see online. I mean, this day and age with the internet, nothing gets hidden. That you had all those flights coming to Sofia. And for goodness sake, the Ukrainian foreign minister, Kuleba, spent 3 days in Sofia. Why would he waste his time to just talk to the locals? I mean, of course, they met him, but there was business to be done. And again, after the government fell, after Petkov went in August last year, it's as if nothing changed with those deliveries. So GERB-SDS continued to send ammunition. You had, I hate to sound as a conspiracy theorist, but there's this enterprise in Kazanlak Arsenal, a very old munitions factory going back to the 19th century. So in last summer, they put forward, they advertised 300 new workplaces. And as they say in this town, if we are doing fine in this place, somebody else in the world is not doing fine. But it goes to show that the aid to Ukraine has been consistent. There are refugees as well in Ukraine, and this has given some leeway. But I think essentially Bulgaria under Borisov got a relatively positive treatment from the rest of the EU because Borisov was not behaving as Orban. He knew that he had to go with the mainstream. He never vetoed anything until Macedonia, of course. He looked at what Merkel was doing and he did precisely the same. On the assumption that what happens in Sofia stays in Sofia, we don't export our problems to European level. And this bargain seemed to work for a long time.
So it didn't surprise you that the policy stance was so, well, not open as you say, but everybody knew it, but was so very much pro-Ukrainian, although you have a high level of pro-Russian sentiment in the population.
Well, the mentality of the Bulgarian elite is you want to be safe. People are risk averse, with some exceptions. So the way to go about foreign policy, and we are venturing in this area, is just to please everyone. So if you're Radev, who happened to run the country for a long time, publicly he was opposing the war, he still is. But I'm sure behind closed doors, he had a very different story to tell, that we're going and we are helping to the best of our knowledge, to the best of our abilities. But basically, the idea is that you're a small country, you have all those historic experiences of suffering and being caught in the crossfire. So be careful what you do, unless you get hurt. And by you, it's not just the country, but also individual policymakers who might take a hit. And this is very characteristic of Borisov as well. He speaks the macho language, but if you look at his political behavior over the years, he's really circumspect and risk averse in domestic but also foreign affairs.
I see. Mina, you're a specialist on propaganda and disinformation, not only about let me put it that way, positive or real journalism. Bulgaria has been subjected to massive Russian propaganda, and I read I think today or yesterday that a new instrument was implemented to the defense ministry, like an anti-disinformation organization trying to fight that. Is that realistic, given that you have a lot of pro-Russian media and, as I said, a pro-Russian sentiment? So is this disinformation not something that is being sucked up and welcomed by part of the population?
I think to some extent it is being welcomed by some of the people. But I think what's really important to note is that there are some people that are definitively pro-Russian, and they have 100% the standing of supporting Russia. But there are a lot of people that have a historical and somehow even emotional connection to Russia, but they are not necessarily aligned with Putin's positions and understanding of the war that he's leading and that Russia is leading in Ukraine. And what needs to is we need to try and counter disinformation for the people that are in between. There are some people that, in my personal opinion, cannot be put off from the disinformation. That's basically everywhere, and social media is a huge problem for that. But there are people that are in between, that are not entirely sure what to think. They don't trust the media, they don't trust the authorities, and so whatever they hear on mass media or by the authorities, they don't find to be respectable enough. They don't think that's the truth, and they look for the truth elsewhere. And if by looking elsewhere, they only find disinformation and Russian propaganda, which has made its very, in a very good way, made its way into people's social media accounts, into people's everyday lives, and into even conversations in between people. If they only find that when they look elsewhere from authorities and say mass media, then we have a huge problem. But if they also find somebody that's trying to counter disinformation or present the facts as they actually are, then we have a way of maybe going about it.
Maybe this is a naive follow-up question, but I keep reading about the Russian ambassador having a very negative influence and being very, very vocal, and as you said, Russian propaganda on all social media. But did this really change the public discourse on Ukraine? So is an anti-Ukrainian sentiment growing, or is it in fact something that Russia tries, but it doesn't really get anywhere?
I wouldn't say that it's growing. Like right at the beginning of the war, the pro-Russian sentiment was actually going down because everyone was seeing what was happening. But with the way that disinformation is spreading and that it works, and messages and narratives that it puts forward for people in Bulgaria, because a lot of them are specifically tailored for Bulgarian people, and specifically the ones that are actually tailored for Bulgarian people are very resilient. And whenever that happens, I think that an anti-Ukrainian feeling and narrative has been a part of the picture since the beginning of the war, and it's been talked about by public figures, and not only just by like social media or websites or in between people. And there's been a narrative against the Ukrainian refugees about how they supposedly the country is only helping them and not helping, say, victims of floods that happened again a few days back, and that's been going on social media again. So I think that I don't know if it's exactly the Russian ambassador that's been helping that go around. She has done it, but she's not the main problem, I don't think.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Maybe she's just a face for the story. We have a few more minutes. I would like to touch on shortly on two topics, and then I would like to open the discussion to the people who are hopefully very fascinatedly listening to us. Daniel, you're back. I want to know. There has been something. The discussion about North Macedonia and Bulgaria has been going on for a while now. Can you explain to us what, when it comes to domestic politics, what is the aim, what is the perception, and what is the problem that leads that does not make it possible to solve this conflict? Or who's interested in keeping it alive? Let me put it that way.
The second type of formulation is more helpful.
Sorry,
otherwise,
I was getting there.
Otherwise, it's difficult actually to pin down exactly what the core or the essence of the problem is. But what I can say is that there are strong actors that, for one reason or another, think that Bulgaria should be tough on northern Macedonia, that either it should keep a veto on its membership, the membership of this country into the European Union, or even starting meaningful negotiations, or that we should place increasing amount of conditions. And here, of course, the radical nationalists and populists, parties like Vazrazhdane, but also Slavy Trifonov's There is Such a People. The second part is very interesting because it has become something like the mouthpiece of President Radev. And in fact, on certain issues, but on Macedonia, we can say with some degree of confidence that they express attitudes that are typical of the presidency. So President Radev was not very happy with the brokered compromise with Northern Macedonia. He was one of the last politicians actually to accept the so-called French proposal. And his opposition to this process, I think, is lasting, and it hasn't stopped. So mostly because of the reaction of such actors, in fact, the Bulgarian position on Northern Macedonia is creating serious problems in the negotiation process. Now, the ball, however, is in the Macedonian part, because although on the Bulgarian side there are such rhetorical outbursts, after all, we still support the so-called French proposal, the French solution. And technically, Bulgaria is waiting for Macedonia to introduce necessary amendments to its constitution. So at the level of formal policy, there is no substantial change in the Bulgarian position. But there are these domestic pressures that are growing from the political players that I mentioned. To those players, we have to add the Bulgarian Socialist Party, which also has this type of attitude. So basically, if some sort of abstraction to the process is about to come, it will mostly be from the direction of those actors. The others, GERB, Continuing Change, DPS, they are not usual suspects from this point of view. They do have a more, I would say, pro-European position on this issue. And although GERB have been opportunistic, they have in the past changed their attitude from time to time. After all, now they are holding a more steady course, which is good news because the government is under the control exactly of these actors. So we don't have to expect any major surprises. But the situation is complex because all sorts of incidents, all sorts of media stories are used by the others to create an atmosphere of how to put it? They're trying to mobilize the public against a swift solution to the so-called Northern Macedonian question. And otherwise, if you look at the interests of both Northern Macedonia and especially Bulgaria, any objective analysis should say that, of course, the integration of the Western Balkans within the EU is in Bulgaria's primary national interest.
Yes,
So
obviously,
that's
yes.
why I am in a difficulty to explain the deeper logic of these attempts to create abstractions to the process.
Okay. Well, I'm grateful that the three of you tried to explain lots of difficult problems and find a greater logic. That I would like to open the floor now if there are questions, and I would like to invite you to put them to our three wonderful speakers and knowledgeable speakers. And I will, I would like to find out: is there anybody who would want to talk or write?
Actually, we do not have raised hands, but we have 3 written questions. And they all concern President Rumen Radev. So the first one is more on the domestic policy. How do you assess Radev's role? He has enjoyed being on the international stage very much. What can we expect from him with regard to North Macedonia? I mean, we touched upon this briefly, and Ukraine. Will he mobilize the pro-Russian sentiments in society, play to the BSP and Vazrazhdane? Then what is the role of President Rumen Radev, like domestic?
So should we divide it because there's already 3 questions in one. So otherwise, I think we're going to get confused. Is it okay?
Yeah. Of course.
Okay. Can I give that one to Daniel and then hand it over to the other ones? Sorry.
Yeah.
Sure.
President Radev, of course, had a great influence on Bulgarian politics. He still has, because he's the most popular Bulgarian politician. It's partly due to the presidency. Normally, the holders of the presidential presidential office, they do have bigger public confidence. So his role cannot be underestimated by any means. The thing about it that there is a specific ambiguity to this role. On the one hand, he has expressed quite a lot of pro-Russian attitudes. I would say he has, for instance, he's an advocate of the thesis that there should be peace in Ukraine, practically at any cost. So this means that, of course, everyone would accept that we should be striving for peace in Ukraine. But what is meant by that is that, in fact, Ukraine should lose the war. And in fact, the second step to this policy is his position that sending arms to Ukraine actually is bad because it prolongs the war. So that's these are his official positions, and they're very, very close to the official positions of Russia at the very moment. So the other thing is that President Radev, of course, officially he is for the European Union, for the membership of Bulgaria in NATO, and so on. But whenever he makes a public address at a public holiday or something like that, normally he doesn't say anything about the European Union, for instance. He doesn't mention it as if it doesn't exist. And NATO is pretty much in the same position. So that's the ambiguity. And what I can say is that in terms of concrete policies, Bulgaria has not veered off its pro-European trajectory. Even in terms of sending arms to Ukraine, Bulgaria has been one of the relatively big contributors to and so on. And even the governments, the interim governments of the president. So the policies have continued. But rhetorically, I think President Radev has managed to shift Bulgaria in a different direction. And this is important because of his public influence. He manages, he has the power to influence public opinion. And if you read surveys on Bulgaria compared to other European countries, you will see that the Bulgarian public opinion is actually quite different, even from the public opinion of countries like Hungary. Of course, to some direct questions like, would you leave the EU, 70% of Bulgarians would say no. But to questions whether you approve President Putin's policies, for instance, 60% of Bulgarians would say no, but there is a substantial chunk of people who would, in fact, either be ambiguous or would support Putin's policies. And this is different from public opinion in other European countries. And here I think the president does have a significant role because he could form and shape public opinion exactly in those directions. And in fact, he's building up public support for maybe for future actions, which he hasn't undertaken at the moment. But the other thing that we have to say now is that he has made enemies, and the two most prominent pro-European parties in Bulgaria, which are Continuing Change and Democratic Bulgaria on the one hand, and GERB on the other side. President Radev is gradually positioning himself as a political alternative to those parties which, for the time being and for the last 10 years and more, have been actually the main pro-European party. So that's another element that needs to be taken into account. So he's not an Orban. His policy is not a direct confrontation with the European Union, but in terms of shifting public opinion and creating an environment for a future shift of political positions, I think he's quite a potent political player.
Thank you very much. So I interrupted you. I'm sorry. There were two more questions concerning Radev. I'm sorry.
No worries. It's good that we're splitting it up. The second question goes more into the direction of his relation to the new government. So the question goes, Rumen Radev clearly opposed the formation of the government. Now more than 20 regional governors he appointed have resigned. What disruptive maneuvers can he engage in, and who is supporting him?
Well, Mina, do you want to answer? Or Dimitar, I don't know.
Yeah, let's look at the big picture. Radev has how many years? Maybe 2-3 years left of his term. And what's next for him? He cannot remain president because it's his second term. He won't be able to go to Brussels because what he said about Ukraine disqualifies him. The only path forward is to become an electoral politician. He wants to be a party leader and to enter day-to-day politics. In the past, he tried to appeal to electorates on both sides, to the sort of left-leaning, Russia-friendly electorate. He made all those noises, but also he had an offering around 3 years ago to the reformist pro-European electorate with judicial reform and accountability around the protests in 2020. Now, I think he made a decision to go for the Russia-friendly electorate, because there is an opening. The Socialist Party is in decline. God knows what happens to revival. He can compete there, and by opposing this government, which is a grand coalition, he tries to plant his flag. I mean, what he said, that he is against the formation of a government, which is way beyond his constitutional powers. to me is indicative. So of course, I mean, he'll try to obstruct, he'll veto legislation, he might cooperate here and there, but I think that the big theme for him, the big goal is how he reinvents himself, his next life. It's a record is very mixed. There have been precedents before when Parvanov left office in 2012. He tried to return to the Socialist Party as a leader, and he was squarely defeated in the party congress. So he cannot, rather didn't have a party before. He cannot take over an existing force. The only thing he can do is just to start something new in the future, which will be looking at this populist electorates playing towards Russia. And I think that's what directs his actions.
May I interrupt with one question, because both of you were like hinting to the fact that he might he be founding a new party, or is that what this is going on for?
Well, he cannot do it now. He cannot do it now because he's in the presidency. He'll flirt and cooperate with others, but he'll be setting the scene for that.
Okay.
Preparing the ground and influencing public opinion, shaping position, and after his term expires, we will see him in new reincarnation. By the way, the thing will happen with Bechev. He'll become an active politician, I think.
Okay. So third question for Mina.
Yeah, the third one is easier or maybe shorter. Are there any plausible arguments for his impeachment? And do you think that We Continue to Change and Democratic Bulgaria are going to pursue his impeachment?
I don't think that they will pursue it for a few reasons. First of all, I think that if they try and pursue impeachment of Radev, that gives him a better path forward for the creation of his own potential party and making him an electoral politician, first of all, and then second of all, we mentioned earlier the wiretap scandal when the leaders of Continue to Change, they actually discussed that and expressed that particular opinion, which is why I think they won't go for it. Other than that, he has done things that are way beyond his constitutional powers, like Dimitar said, and he's expressing of opinions that the government that was eventually formed should not be formed, and that if he wasn't made by the constitution to give the mandate to these people, he wouldn't. That was way beyond everything that he was supposed to be expressing as an opinion. But I don't believe that they actually have a way to talk about impeachment, and I don't think that they will, because up until 2026, when his term ends, he won't have any moves to make other than, like Dimitar said, try and veto legislation and be in any way doing maneuvers to try and make it harder for the government to do whatever they want to do. But other than that, which is not won't be, I think, a huge problem for them if they decide to do anything. He has a few years where
I think he'll be back, because there'll be instability again. It's a very fragmented political scene. There's a high chance of another caretaker government in the future. So we haven't seen the last of him.
But I don't believe that he's going to get impeached and then go for it.
No, I definitely agree with you, because I mean, if you're a politician in the government, do you want to burden the agenda so to take all the oxygen from all other issues? You spent another 6 months talking about Radev as opposed to the Eurozone, any other public policy issue that is important for electorate. What is the payoff? Something that might fail to deliver. I don't see any political rationale, but maybe I'll be surprised. I don't know. I don't see any willingness to go that direction.
Okay, thank you. Are there more questions?
I have two more questions, if I may. I would pose them both, and then you decide who can answer which one, because we're only 10 minutes left. And then, so the first one is on the local elections. So what to expect in Bulgaria for local elections? Has the date been set yet? And what could change? And the second question is on the referendum or a potential referendum against the introduction of the euro. What does it mean for the government's reform plans, and which forces are at work here?
Who wants to go forward?
Maybe I'll take the question, well, both questions. So the first one about the local elections. Well, local elections are quite messy usually in Bulgaria. And well, different parties, they group in specific ways. Coalitions in different cities are different from national coalitions. So at the end of local elections, pretty much everyone has the right to say that they have won something. The biggest issue will be, of course, what will happen in Sofia, whether there will be a change to the mayorship of GERB, and also some of the other big cities like Plovdiv, Varna, and some others. This would be quite symbolic if in Sofia we continue to change. Democratic Bulgaria managed to win the elections. This would be a huge boost to them also at the national level. But otherwise, yeah, local elections are important because they create power bases for specific parties. And GERB, with their more than 10-year reign in office, in the previous years, they have managed to establish such power bases throughout the country. It will be very difficult to dislodge them, and GERB will try to preserve as much as possible from their power bases in not only in Sofia but also in the provinces. The issue with the Euro referendum is very important, and in fact, there is a very strong argument that such a referendum is not constitutional. It will be challenged in the Constitutional Court. I'm not sure how the court is going to decide about it, but there are good constitutional arguments that it shouldn't be allowed because Bulgaria, upon entering into EU, has taken upon itself to become part of the monetary and economic union, and it depends only on the preparedness of the country to join the Eurozone. So the argument is whenever we are ready, we are obliged by treaty to join the Eurozone. That's one interesting issue, how the Constitutional Court is going to tackle. Another issue is that under the current law, referendums should be scheduled together with elections, and this raises the possibility for the referendum to pass the necessary threshold for validity. And the other thing is that the president determines when the election, the referendum should take place. And this is also a huge power, and we could expect that President Radev will try to schedule the referendum together with elections, most probably the local elections.
Okay. Any additions to that, or do you find that answered completely? Everybody's fine? Okay, any more new questions having come up?
One last question I would say we can take. It's
okay.
About the Schengen area. Is joining the Schengen area a top priority for the new government? And if so, do you as the speakers see it happening by the end of 2023?
Okay, actually, as the one living in Austria, I would say that I'm embarrassed for the Austrian government to having inflicted this whole situation on Bulgaria, but I'm not the one to talk. So who wants to talk about Schengen?
I think it's not such a priority compared to the Eurozone. I mean, it's important because Bulgaria was ready 10 years ago, but the record shows that it's not something that keeps politicians in Sofia up at night. So if it happens, it will be great and they'll take credit for it. But the big story is the euro, because the stakes are so much higher. And if there's a delay Eurozone membership, that might undercut trust in the currency board arrangement. It might be a real problem. But no, I don't think Schengen. And this whole notion that the Dutch and the French proposed in 2012, the Schengen could be the carrot to spur reform in Bulgaria. The theory doesn't work. I mean, you don't have any evidence that any government is prepared to do anything on judicial reform or rule of law because of Schengen. Because many of the benefits Schengen gives you are already there with free movement.
Yeah, maybe Schengen is more of a pressure instrument for those who already have it, in denying it to those who don't, than the other way around. But anyways, yeah. Okay, so we are through, I think. Thank you very much for your time, for your energy, your intelligence, your knowledge. I hope everybody's happy and satisfied. And we're going to talk about the question how long this government survives, or maybe did survive, next time we meet in this or any other surrounding. I personally hope it lasts for a while and some of the reforms can be tackled now. That would be a nice thing to talk about the next time, about the successes, hopefully. So thank you, everybody, and have a wonderful afternoon and the rest of the day.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.